اللهم صل على محمد رسول الله.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
بسم الله أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today we continue the second half of this great giant among the four great giants, or among the many great giants of the scholars of Islam. Imam al-Shafi'i, Muhammad ibn Idris al-Shafi'i. And we have already discussed a large part of his life, of his biography last week. We mentioned his personality, his character, his books, his students, his teachers, his upbringing, how he came to know this knowledge. We spoke about his method, and that his method is like the scholars before him, and that all these Imams, they were teachers of each other, and some of them taught their own teachers, and among them was Imam al-Shafi'i, who taught also, for part of his life, one of his teachers, Sufyan ibn Uyayna, and we'll come to that inshallah today a little bit. Imam al-Shafi'i rahmatullah alayh lived the shortest period of all the Imams. He lived only for 54 years. And today we'll find out the reason why he lived a short time, obviously other than the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has written for everyone their time. But we are talking about these giants who really don't differ from each other much. The only people who made them differ so much are the students and the people who came later on with this zealous, extreme approach, and something we call at-ta'assub al-madhabi, which is zealous or extreme approach to the madhab, blind following of madhab, and they caused a division. Not one of these great Imams ever in their life have been recorded to have said, follow my madhab, or it's an obligation to follow my madhab, otherwise you'll be erred, or for the layman, follow my madhab. In fact, none of them actually wrote their madhab, saying this is my madhab, and wrote down the whole madhab. Only Imam al-Shafi'i wrote a little bit about his principles in a book called Kitab al-Um, and a little bit in a smaller book called Kitab al-Risala. We spoke about these last week. But these are just fundamentals. As for, it was their students, and for Imam Ahmad, for example, it was his students. They wrote down their madhab in detail. And there were alterations even to their madhab. Madhab means a way of thought, a school of thought, on the branches of the religion. An example of that is where you place your hand on your body in salat. Or things about wudu and what breaks wudu, views on particular new issues that really didn't exist at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. And you know what? They had to differ. These Imams and all of them around them had to differ in some areas. Why? Because you see, the deen of Islam is a deen, really, when people study, is a deen of flexibility to a certain point. It's based on evidence, but with the changing societies and changing communities and environment, new things come up. You need scholars to come and bring about new rulings on particular issues. The deen is there for us to help us come up with that solution. So these Imams, what is their role? Their role are two main roles. Number one, to set us back on the straight path when people err, when people go lost. They start to put opinions and views that are not based on any evidence that come from the Quran and Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. The second thing they did was, they came to find solutions for us on new matters, to set us straight so that we know in which direction to head. And for this reason, they could have made mistakes and errors, for they were only human beings. And they all admitted that and said, we are only human beings. We are Imams here to teach you students ways and principles of this Sharia. and we're here to bring you solutions to new things that come up that people can't resolve in the lay person. They also differed because they came from different parts of the world. And in those different parts of the world, there were different circumstances. In the madhab, for example, of Imam Malik, you'll find it more traditional than others because he never left Medina. And the type of school of thought, the view on some of the issues that were in his school of thought, that didn't exist in the Quran and Sunnah. They don't exist. You can't find them in the Hadith or Quran directly. They're new issues that exist in the people of Medina. He's more traditional because there weren't many new issues in his time, and he never left Medina. As for Imam Abu Hanifa, living in Kufa, he had to deal with all these different ideologies that crept in, like Greek philosophy, Aristotle's belief. I don't know if you know about Aristotle and people like, forgot their names now, but people who had lived in those times, Greek philosophy, had to deal with these different ideologies. Things called Mu'tazila and Khawarij. They didn't really exist in Medina. And if they did, they were very minute, and they dissolved and went out. So the madhab, you could see them, they had to differ because of the changing circumstances. But the students that came later on, they couldn't understand how these imams taught very well, and they had this zealous approach where you take the madhab and you make it the din for everything. That's wrong. That's wrong. And these imams definitely did not speak this way, and they respected each other, utmost respect. What I didn't mention last week is that to show you an example of how these imams collaborated and respected each other's views, and how just because one madhab has a different view about a particular issue than the other madhab doesn't mean that you shouldn't follow them in anything anymore. And it also doesn't mean that if you don't follow them, then you're on a bid'ah or an innovation. Imam Shaafi, rahmatullah alayh, learned from the direct students of Abu Hanifa and also from Imam Malik. When he went to Kufa, we said many weeks ago about Imam Abu Hanifa that he died in Kufa, rahmatullah alayh, and his grave is in Kufa in Iraq. When Imam Shaafi went, he went to visit the grave of Imam Abu Hanifa, and he made dua for him. He prayed in a masjid close, which they built after Imam Abu Hanifa. He prayed in this masjid close to the grave, where the grave of Abu Hanifa is. And in the understanding, obviously through dalil and evidence of Imam Shaafi, when he prayed, he used to lift his hands up after ruku', and when he goes into ruku', right? You know that the way you lift your hands, some people do that. And obviously there is dalil for it. He does that in the Shafi'i madhab. But in Abu Hanifa's madhab, it didn't reach him that this is part of the salat. So he didn't raise his hands. That was his view. So Imam Shaafi'i, for the first time there, they saw him not lifting his hands up in the salat. I'm not talking about the first takbir. I'm talking about during the prayer, if you've seen it, after ruku', before ruku'. So they asked him, why did you not follow the view which you know is right in your opinion? He said, because out of respect for the owner of this grave. And he pointed to Abu Hanifa. Now Imam Shaafi is much more knowledgeable than us and knows exactly what he's doing. You need to understand what sunnah is. This sunnah is part of the prayer. If there is a sunnah more important than that sunnah and requires you, that if you need to leave that lesser sunnah for a greater sunnah, then you do so. And Imam Shafi'i, that's what a alim is, to be able to understand the difference and when to apply something, when not to apply something. And when it is not considered innovation, when it's not considered going against the belief system and the proper sunnah. So he looked at it and thought, these are hundreds of thousands of students who have followed Imam Abu Hanifa, and this is a great Imam Shafi'i who is now popular and renowned for his knowledge, probably in the eyes of many people even more than Abu Hanifa at that time. For him to leave that out at the grave of Abu Hanifa, at the center of where he began his knowledge with the people and died there, for him to leave that would cause, he feared of causing disrespect to their own Imam and possibly a division. And he wanted to teach the people that we are all scholars who follow dalil. And if the Imam makes it right, he gets double the reward. And if he gets it wrong, gets one reward. And I may be wrong, in my view. I may be wrong. To go back to the principle, the fundamental, as all Imams said, don't take from me as the source, but take from where I took. He's speaking to the students of knowledge and the scholars of the future. He used to say, don't follow Al-Awza'i or so-and-so or so-and-so or Layth, or because these were great Imams who had madhabs as well, but they didn't survive for some reason which only Allah knows. But he said, don't follow Awza'i or Layth or so-and-so blindly, but take from where they took. And we mentioned last week that Imam Malik's students later on, especially in some parts of what we call today Sudan, some parts of Eastern Africa then, became so zealous in that they used to ask them, Rasul ﷺ said this, and they would say Imam Malik said that. And not only Sudan, but even other places, even in Iraq, in Egypt, in some parts of Asham. It got to that stage. And these Imams were far detached from this way of rigid thinking. So Imam Shaafi was one of those, and he was one of the first 3 generations after the Prophet ﷺ. Those 3 generations in the Prophet ﷺ spoke about. خَيْرُ الْقُرُونِ قَرْنِي ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يَلُونَهُمْ ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يَلُونَهُمْ. The best of generations are my generation, the Sahaba. ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يَلُونَهُمْ. Then those who come after them, the Tabi'een. ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يَلُونَهُمْ. Then those who come after them, whom we call أتباع التابعين, the followers of the followers. That is the best 3 generations that we can say we sanctify those 300 years after the Prophet ﷺ. They're very special, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed those years for these. And the last of them, among the last of them, was the time of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, who existed in the 3rd generation. Imam Shaafi was in between, the 2nd and the 3rd. We said last week, where we finished off, we said as all the other Imams, Imam Shaafi had to face a great trial. And these Imams were not government scholars, nor were they people scholars, meaning they didn't just, whatever the people voted they went for. They didn't just go for the majority. But they went with evidence and dalil, and they feared Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in it. Their greatest fear was to answer a question, because they would be accountable before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And their motto, their famous sentence was, I do not know. La adri. We saw this with Imam Malik. When a man came from Morocco, travelled 4 months, only to find that Imam Malik said to him, I don't know. And he went back for 4 months, 8 months, only to tell his people that Imam Malik says he doesn't know the answer. And they used to say that he was the most knowledgeable in the world. So Imam Shaafi played that role. We said that Imam Shaafi was an encyclopedist. He was not only specialized in fiqh, in sharia, he also specialized in other disciplines. Linguistics, Arabic. As we said, he spent 17 years of his childhood and teenager years in the deserts with the Bedouins called Banu Huzayl. And they were the fountain, the spring of Arabic. So much so that Imam Shaafi became a reference. If you debated, 2 great scholars debated on an Arabic word, they would say, let's ask Imam Shafi'i. If he says it's an Arabic word, everyone stops. And truly that's how, he was the reference. You know, when you go back to the dictionary today or the encyclopedia and say, okay, here's the reference, we should all stop. Well, he was it. And everybody stopped in the whole world. He was the Arabic linguistic and linguistician. And he also was an expert in medicine. He used to say, I quote from Imam Shaafi, he used to say 2 things. Do not live in a land unless it has 2 things. Scholars of Islam, of Sharia, and doctors of medicine. Because if you don't have the knowledge of the deen, you go astray. You go astray spiritually. And if you don't have medicine and doctors, then you'll become unhealthy and die, or become unhealthy and filled with illnesses and sickness. So he said you need to have both these things, inshallah. He also said this ummah seems to have left out a large portion of this deen. What was it? Medicine. Al-Muttib. In the Quran, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions different things, He goes into medicine and biology and geology and history, to the aquatic life, to astronomy, to maths, to everything. And no one can say that these disciplines are rubbish. You know, I hate people who say, the only knowledge is the knowledge of the Quran and Sunnah. The Quran and Sunnah is full of knowledge about medicine and maths and astronomy as well. It refers to it. The Quran covers all these areas. You have to know them. Allah says, for example, قُلْ سِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ فَانْظُرُوا كَيْفَ كَانَ عَاقِبَةُ الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ. Travel in the world and learn about genealogy and geology and history of people who were before. But obviously a mu'min, when he studies these things, or Allah says, فَارْجِعَ الْبَصَرِ, look into the space, into the stars, into the outer world. Your sight will come back feeble. Look again, research. But we look with a different heart. We look not to challenge God, Allah. We look to learn more about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His greatness. That's the only difference. If Imam Shaafi could study everything, he would. But as Allah says in the Quran, if Allah wanted, He would have made them all the same. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose from people expertise in different areas so that we can become an ummah of all disciplines, inshaAllah. And this is where our power lies, knowledge, ilm, nur. Imam Shaafi had a great memory, and we mentioned that his teacher, one of his teachers was Waqi', who was also known as, well, his original name is Abu Sufyan al-Kufi. You would probably hear him as Waqi', but when you read about him in the history books, he's mentioned as Abu Sufyan al-Kufi. We mentioned that he was one of his favorite teachers, and the poem about how he complained to him when he lost his memory for a little bit when he saw the part of the leg of a woman. That's what the story goes. Allahu A'lam, the exact details of it. So Imam al-Shafi'i was special in that he learnt and studied under all the schools of thought that existed and past. He was an expert in all of them and mastered all of them and their ways of thinking, including the wrong ways that were called al-Mu'tazila. And one of his expertise was in something called Ahlul Bayt, which we're going to talk about it today. He studied Abu Hanifa's madhab extensively with his students and with the students of another one called Al-Awza'i, etc., etc. So he had further depth even than the scholars that existed in his time, and many of them before. He encouraged the memorization and learning of the Quran because it gives you status. Hadith, because your arguments become strong with it. Language, because it is the window to others. And other disciplines of maths and medicine, etc. He had a charisma of wisdom. When he sat, the students could not help themselves but flock away from all the other teachers and come to sit in his circle. Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, one of his favorite students, we'll try and talk about him today inshallah. First time seeing Imam al-Shafi'i, he saw in Baghdad, he saw the students flock to him and leave their own teachers, including a famous teacher who was called Sufyan ibn Uyayna, who was one of the teachers of Imam al-Shafi'i and later on became sort of like a student to Imam al-Shafi'i. There would be 54 halaqas, 54 circles in the masjid in Baghdad, for example. And when Imam al-Shafi'i came along, they all became one circle, which was the circle of Imam al-Shafi'i. Imagine that, 54 great ulama. And all the students would leave them and come to sit. And I wouldn't be exaggerating to say that even some of their teachers would come and also sit with them. An example of how he taught one of his teachers, Sufyan ibn Uyayna, a remarkably extraordinary scholar actually, was that one time Sufyan came up to him and asked him about a hadith. Or in fact, he presented to him the interpretation of a hadith. He said, Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam narrated its chain of narration, of course, and then he said, لَيْسَ مِنَّا مَنْ لَمْ يَتَغَنَّى بِالْقُرْآنِ. Literally meaning, he is not one of us who does taghanna in the Quran. And the word taghanna was the problem. He said, I interpret the word taghanna to mean those who dwell into the Quran and take it as the primary source. He is not one of us who does not take the Quran as the primary source and dwell into it. يَتَغَنَّى. But the word in Arabic, ghina, comes from singing. So Imam al-Shafi'i replied by saying, if so, if what you're saying is true, then the word would not be yataghanna. It would have been yataghana. أو يتغانى. But يتغنى means melodious voice. And other such examples. So to beautify your voice in the Quran as much as you can. Obviously some people don't have a nice voice. I don't want you to think that you're not one of the ummah of the Prophet ﷺ. He said he's not one of us who doesn't beautify his voice in the Quran. It means that you learn the ahkam, the ruling of the Quran as much as you can. You don't read it like a newspaper, and whatever you can. I know that some people don't even know how to read Arabic, but you try. The hadith of the Prophet ﷺ says, the person who reads the Quran وَهُوَ يُتَعْتِعُ بِهِ, while stuttering in it, trying hard, makes a mistake here and there, has double the reward. But those who keep going and get to the highest stage of reading the Quran, then they will be among the status of the abrar, the high righteous people. So in other words, both people are winners. But in other words, you have to try and learn the Quran as much as you can. And if you have a voice, to use it in the Quran. Shaafi improved the way we can understand hadith and ayat of the Quran by looking at something called context. Like, why did this verse come in? In what situation? We don't just take a verse and run with it. You know, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاقْتُلُوهُمْ حَيْثُ ثَقِفْتُمُوهُمْ. Kill them wherever you see them. And we stop there. If you're going to take just the ayah by itself, without looking at the context, another ayat, in the beginning of the ayah and the end of the ayah, and what the scholars said about it, it would mean they're going to go off on a rampage of murder and pillage and kill every non-Muslim you see. But this is not Islam, of course, and no, Islam never taught this. It came as a mercy to people. Or if you're going to go by just picking things and running off with them, one scholar was talking about some people who looked at the ayah which says, فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ, hellfire to those who pray. And you stop there. But then you continue by saying, الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنْ صَلَاتِهِمْ سَاهُونَ, those who are neglectful of their prayers. Meaning they pray, but they pray to show it off. They pray for the wrong reasons. They pray when no one's looking. They cut off their prayer and they're neglectful of it. These people are careless in their prayer. They're neglectful of their prayer. So then it explains it. It's just a simple example. So be careful, my brothers and sisters, and what you say you'll be accountable for. Shaafi'i's adab and respect in debating is also very renowned. And he learnt this off Ibn Hasan al-Shaybani, who was one of the students of Abu Hanifa. He also learnt it of Imam Malik. For example, he never raised his voice in any debate. Number two, he stayed calm in every debate. He never debated, he used to say, that he never debated with anyone except that he made dua that the opponent, the person who's debating him, is in the right and the right is with him. And he made a dua to help him. So imagine you're debating someone on a view and you've got different view, and you're making dua that your brother who is debating you is on the right and that Allah guides him. But the only thing is that they had, as I said last week, a commitment to honesty. That was the only difference. Okay, I want you to be right, but I also have a commitment to honesty. And that's the deen. The deen is not yours or mine. He used to say, I never debated with anyone and liked him to make a mistake. He also said, give and take, listen and speak, and don't criticize the person personally. So there were no egos in all the differences of opinions. He used to say, throw away my opinion if it goes against the sunnah, and take it as my madhab, for this is what we all want. He also had a sense of humor, Imam Shaafi. An example of that is that he never used to stretch his legs out when people were sitting around him. He considered it aib. Got some Turkish people that would know what this word means as well, aib, as in its lack of decency and courtesy for others to do something like that. But he also had a problem with his legs. He needed to stretch them. So he would use humor to have an excuse to stretch his legs. One time he was sitting and his students who were around him, and he asked a question. One student gave an answer which was way off track. So he said, well, since I have students like that, then I think there's nothing wrong with me stretching my leg. And he'd stretch his leg like that. And all of the Imams, they had a sense of humor, all of them. And when you talk about Imams and scholars, you don't think rigidity and toughness, and they all had a sense of humor. They were like the Prophet ﷺ. He used to joke a lot, but his jokes were those that brought people, not divided people. Another title of Imam Shaafi'i is Nasir al-Sunnah. the victor of the sunnah, the one who gives victory to the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He differed from Imam Malik by using more reasoning, etc. And I mentioned last week that there were in his time two thoughts that were becoming a bit extreme in both ways. They were called Ahlul Ra'i and Ahlul Hadith. Ahlul Ra'i were the people of opinion, and Ahlul Hadith, the people of Hadith. People of opinion meant that after looking in the Quran and Sunnah, they would also utilize reasoning and logic further. Ahlul Hadith were a little bit more literal to the Hadith and followed text more traditionally. And if there was no text, they wouldn't go into anything further. Imam Shaafi was something in between. He was half-half. He used both in a balanced form. And Imam Shaafi'i, Imam Ahmad says, Imam Ahmad, for example, was more into Hadith than Malik. He used the Quran and Sunnah, and then later on used a little bit of something called analogies. Imam Shaafi'i was also in between of that. But they all took from the same source, and they all intended the same outcome. The problem and disaster that happened later on is from the students in middle centuries, unfortunately, where people became so, as I said before, extreme in the madhabs to the point where they won't pray behind a person from another madhab. They won't marry a person from another madhab. And this is tanattu'. Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Halak al-mutanatti'un." Those who are extreme are set to destruction as the people before you. And none of these Imams ever taught this or did that. They prayed behind each other. They respected each other and everything. Imam Shaafi'i had something called, his sources were the Quran, the Sunnah. And if he couldn't find the information in the Quran and Sunnah, he would use something called ijma'. Ijma' means consensus. That when all the scholars or the Sahaba agree on something, he would take it. It wasn't like a vote. Okay, is alcohol halal? Who'd make a vote? Let's make a vote. If the majority say yes, then we'll just drink alcohol. Not like that. Qiyas, ijma' meant that the great scholars and the great Sahabas, they agreed on an opinion and he followed it. The fourth source which he used was something called qiyas. Qiyas means to come up with a ruling based on analogy, something that is like it. Further than that, he didn't go. And he said that's enough, inshaAllah. He wrote 170 books, but the most monumental books were Kitab made up of 7 to 8 volumes, and Al-Risala. Al-Risala is a very balanced book. It's got the fundamentals and principles of fiqh, which all scholars can use, and they don't differ with any madhab. My brothers and sisters, the scholars say that the book of Imam Shaafi'i, Kitab they said, you can see the spirit of Abu Hanifa throughout the book Imam Shaafi'i, you can see the spirit of Abu Hanifa in his book even though he differed on a lot of his branches of his madhab. And he also differed on many of the branches of his teacher, Imam Malik. And he was the first, or maybe not the first, but the one who stood out in saying, listen, he felt that people were following their Imams in a zealous approach, like they were prophets almost. So he wanted to break that trend a little bit to say, look, I'm even writing a book correcting some of the views of my own master, and he used to call him master, Imam Malik, to show you that there has to be respect, but at the same time a commitment to honesty. Because of that, the students of Imam Malik, after Imam Malik died, began to hate Imam Shaafi'i. And there was one in particular, who I forgot his name now, who had it in for Imam Shaafi'i a lot. And it's the result of extremism. Again, Imam Malik used to love Imam Shaafi'i, and Imam Shaafi'i used to love Imam Malik. And so much so that Imam Shaafi'i promised Imam Malik that he will visit him. That's something else. They loved each other immensely. When Imam Malik died, his students became overzealous. And a lot of them used to come and flock to the classes of Imam Shaafi'i until one day they beat him up. And I'm going to talk about it in the end, inshaAllah. Imam Shaafi'i used to praise Imam Abu Hanifa by saying, Al-ulama'u 'iyalun 'ala Abi Hanifa fil fiqh. Scholars and people are like children, dependent on Abu Hanifa in his knowledge. We are all iyad, we are all dependent on him. So he is like the master, the father of fiqh, of sharia. Like the way people say, I don't know, Bruce Lee, or what's his master's name? Ip Man is the master of Kung Fu or some style. And then came Bruce Lee, and so on and so forth. But Imam Abu Hanifa was like that pinnacle of these Imams. And he used to say, we are all children or dependent on his fiqh, on his jurisprudence, because he laid the foundation. He left many students behind in Hijaz, in Baghdad, in Egypt. For example, Ahmad ibn Hanbal al-Buwaiti, another scholar who actually died at the time of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal in that trial, which I'm going to talk about inshallah later on. Another man by the name of Rubai' al-Muradi, etc. And some familiar scholars who followed the school of thought of Imam al-Shafi'i were Al-Bayhaqi, if you ever heard of him, As-Suyuti, Imam al-Bukhari. They followed the madhab of Imam al-Shafi'i. It is said that Imam al-Shafi'i used to recite the whole Quran every day once. Some say that in Ramadan he used to recite the Quran twice every day. He used to finish it 60 times in the whole month of Ramadan. And they also said this about Imam Abu Hanifa. Now that is a little bit of a, I think, Allahu A'lam, to me it seems an exaggeration. But then again, when you think about those 300 years which the Prophet ﷺ praised so much, and then you read about science and quantum physics and things about time, and I don't know what research they're doing today, you come to think, were those 300 years blessed times? I mean, did it seem like the sun or the earth rotated a little bit slower, so the day was longer? Allahu A'lam. But these narrations are there almost by every scholar you read in history about Imam Malik and all those, or Imam Shaafi and all. They say Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Shaafi used to read the whole Quran in Ramadan twice a day. Allahu A'lam. But the point is, they were extremely pious and righteous people beyond measure. Imam Shaafi suffered two great trials. The first trial was the trial, one of them was the trial of Khalq al-Quran. There was a people called al-Mu'tazila, and they came with Greek philosophy thoughts. Look, they followed the Quran and the Sunnah, these people. And I'm going to talk about them later when I talk about Imam Abu Hanifa. But the problem with them, as I said before, anything that goes beyond its measure turns against you. Extremism. We have a saying in Arabic, or the Hadith Prophet ﷺ, I think it was, Allahu A'lam, كل شيء زاد عن حده انقلب إلى ضده. Everything that goes beyond its limits will turn against you. It means that you might have the right, but then you go beyond your right. You go extreme in something, and suddenly what was once your right becomes your enemy, goes against you. And religion can take you in a very dangerous direction if you don't understand it. In the name of religion. Yes, that's true. It can make you go cuckoo up here if you don't follow it correctly. And these people said that the Quran is created, it's not actually the word of God directly. It's an issue that's not worth a cent. Insignificant issue, but they brought it out and scholars were beheaded, tortured, because they had to stop this view about Aqidah. And one of them was Imam al-Shafi'i, who had to face this trial. But the only thing is that Imam al-Shafi'i got out of it. And he said, the Bible, the Zabur, the Injil, the Torah and the Quran, these four are created. What he meant was these four fingers are created. It didn't mean that the words of Allah are created. And they liked it. The government liked it, and they said, okay, let all the Imams they say the same thing. But Imam Ahmad was the only one who stood firm on it for a reason Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows. And we'll explain inshallah when we come to Imam Ahmad's story. The second trial Imam Shafi'i really went through, with which Imam Ahmad didn't go to that extent, was a very sensitive political problem. Like the way terrorism is today. When you say terrorism, government, they start bugging your phone. If you say words like that at the airport, that's it. It's a very, you can be imprisoned for it. Like that, it's like a taboo. terrorism, fundamentalism, fanatics. When you use these words, the red lights start to go off. And in those days, there was something similar to that, which was the issue of Ahlul Bayt. Today we have the similar issue, which has developed into something called Shi'ism, Shia. And the Shia who claim that they are the beloveds and the ones who love Ahlul Bayt more than anyone else in the world. In those days there was no such thing as Shia yet, the formal name called Shia. But there were some people developing from among the people who started to claim love for the family of the Prophet ﷺ in a zealous way, in an extreme way. Whereupon they began to give them over praise. And then he started to enter into the political arena. There were two great empires we mentioned last week. They're called Bani Abbas and Bani Umayyah. Remember? Bani Abbas and Bani Umayyah. Bani Abbas were more linked to the Prophet ﷺ's line from his uncle Abbas, and Bani Umayyah more from the Muawiyah side. But they were all cousins. They were all from Banu Hisham. They were like Ulad al-Am, we say. They're uncles, their forefathers are uncles, and they come from the same grandfather, only a couple of hundred years back. But they had this hate towards each other, and each one claimed that the Khilafah should be for them. Banu Abbas said, we're the ones, and we carry more of that bloodline. The other side of Umayyah, they said, no, we carry more of that bloodline. And then there was another group called the Alawites, not the Alawis of today, the Alawites as in the ones who carried the blood that went back to Ali radiallahu anhu, literally. I'm not saying the ones who, and the ones who supported them. And these Alawites in those days were actually great people. We're talking about Zainul Abidin, the son of Ali radiallahu anhu, Zayd ibn Ali, Zainul Abidin ibn Ali radiallahu anhu, who existed at the time of Abu Hanifa. And he went up against the government, and Abu Hanifa supported him. In the time of Imam Shaafi, this was developing. This was getting worse. This idea of Ahlul Bayt and the Khilafah should be for Ahlul Bayt. And the problems were, who are Ahlul Bayt? Who are they in the first place? The Umayyads has taken over the Abbasids at that time. And the Abbasids claimed Khilafah. And they said, we've got to take it back. Our bloodline is more important. Anyone who mentioned this issue was put to death. Anyone revolting against the government about this, they were killed on the spot regardless of their status, even if they were Imam Shaafi himself. Until there came a Khalifa called Imam Harun al-Rashid. He was a little bit better than the others. He was a ruler, and in his time there was a ruler in Yemen. This ruler in Yemen did not like Imam Shaafi, because Imam Shaafi used to warn people and say the ruler of Yemen is an unjust ruler. Like all the other Imams, they did not fear for the sake of Allah. And he spoke about injustice. So this ruler of Yemen hated Imam Shaafi and wanted to get him back in any other way. Pin something on him. Since this idea of Ahlul Bayt and who should be the Khalifa and so on and so forth was there, this ruler of Yemen had captured 9 people who were talking against the government using the idea of Ahlul Bayt. And he accused Imam Shaafi to be one of them, because Imam Shaafi had close connections with them, students I think, or they attended their circle. All of these 9 were beheaded on the spot. As for Imam Shaafi, he was sent to Baghdad to Harun al-Rashid, the Khalifa. And there, Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani, one of his old teachers, the student of Imam Abu Hanifa, who was the chief judge, he interceded for Imam Shaafi in front of the Khalifa and said, he is not a foolish man who talks like this. Imam Shaafi was innocent from all of it. He didn't revolt against the government. That's not the point. But he stood aground against the ruler of Yemen and said, if I wanted to revolt, I would. But I don't see it the correct way. So he let him off, and he said to the chief judge, look after him. But that's not where the most courageous point was. Imam Shafi'i had to draw the line about this idea of Ahlul Bayt. Before I say it, what is Ahlul Bayt? First of all, Ahlul Bayt has nothing to do with the Shia. That's number one. And the Shia of today have gone backwards, saying, there's something called the Ithna Ashariya, the followers of the 12 Imams, the lovers of the 12 Imams, or Sab'iyya, the lovers of the 7 Imams, and then there's the Khamsiyya, there you have 5 Imams, and then you have the Ismailiyya, and then you have all these other types. And they came to be later on. And these people started claiming that they love the 12 Imams more than anyone else in the world. And if you want to know who these Imams we're talking about are, Ali radiallahu anhu being the first. We all love him. And he didn't know that he was supposedly meant to be the first Imam of the 12 Imams. And the Shia put that in this order. They said Ali radiallahu anhu is the first, followed by Hassan second, followed by Al-Hussein the third, followed by Muhammad al-Baqir the fourth, followed by Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq fifth, followed by Ishaq al-Mu'tamar the seventh, or Ismail for the Ismailis the seventh, and so on and so forth. And the Sunnah people, the Sunnis, we love every single one of these Imams, except for the 12th one. We don't know who he is. We don't know who he is. It's just made up. But we love them and revere them. But the problem is that they say we love them more, to the point where they gave them powers and abilities that are really beyond measure. This is similar to how the Jews claim that Ibrahim alayhi salam was a Jew. Allah says in the Quran, مَا كَانَ إِبْرَاهِيمُ يَهُودِيًّا وَلَا نَصْرَانِيًّا. Ibrahim was not a Jew, nor was he a Christian, because the Christians also claimed that Ibrahim was a Jew, and that was a Christian, and that Christ, he was a Christian who took from Abraham, was originally a Christian in some way. So people go back and they start choosing prophets and Imams from the past and say they're ours. There's none of this. And in the Quran, the Ahlul Bayt are, if you look at the Quran, the only time where Ahlul Bayt are mentioned is in relation to the wives of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In the Hadith, it goes to Ali radiallahu anhu, Fatima, Al-Hasan, Al-Hussein, further. And according to the Imams, the rest of the Imams and the scholars, past and present, they say anyone of Banu Hisham, anyone who comes from the line of the Hishami family, or Banu al-Muttalib, then they are also from the family of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The debate was, does it go all the way to Judgment Day? I mean, everyone who comes from the line of the Prophet ﷺ, are they considered Ahlul Bayt? I mean, today, in Asham in Egypt, there are more than 10 million people who claim to be descendants of the Prophet ﷺ. We have a problem here. And are they at the same caliber of all these Imams and all these Ahlul Bayt? Or are they not? Do we now praise them? And the second thing is Ahlul Bayt is a part of our religion. We must love and revere the people of Ahlul Bayt. We recite it in the Quran, Allah, in the Salat and Tahiyyat al-Ibrahimiyya. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad. Kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim. Oh Allah, send praise and blessings unto Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the family of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it's part of our deen. Now that's another issue. And Imam Shaafi went to the extent to say that your prayer cannot be accepted until you recite Al-Ibrahimiyya. It's actually invalid. So we all know Ahlul Bayt and revere them and respect them in every way. But the Shia today and the likes of them, similar to the statement, we're all equal, but we are more equal than others, in that sort of sense. Imam Shaafi'i, what did he do? He created the dividing line clearly and courageously, saying the deen and the Ahlul Bayt have nothing to do with the political makeup. Don't anyone come around and say that the Khalifa has to be from Ahlul Bayt and that the political movement and you fight over bloodline and all that stuff. He didn't. He said you have to separate between these two. And that was a very courageous statement to say in those days. I'm telling you, heads were being cut off for that. I don't have time to go into all the historical. This was from the time of Abu Hanifa, even before. Time of a man called Al-Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, and one of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ was killed because of this reason. Many scholars were killed and tortured because of this. So Imam Shaafi came and made a dividing line. He said Ahlul Bayt has nothing to do with the politics. And for this reason, some people got jealous of Imam Shaafi, and they started claiming that he's a Shi'i later on in history, and they said that he is a sympathizer of them. And some of them said that he doesn't love Ahlul Bayt, and all these people became jealous of him. They also accused Abu Hanifa and Malik as being Shia later on, just because they studied under people of Ahlul Bayt. They studied under Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, revered and great Imam of Ahl Sunnah. People like Muhammad al-Baqir, great Imam of Ahl Sunnah. And these three Imams were students of them. Just because they're students of them doesn't make them Shia or anything like that. And he made a poem saying, if loving Ahlul Bayt means I'm Rafidi, then I am a Rafidi. Rafidi was another name they used then, which developed into the name Shia today. In other words, it's saying Ahlul Bayt, loving Ahlul Bayt has nothing to do with anything. Imam Ahmad's son, Imam Ahmad, his student, his son, Abdullah, asked his father one time about Imam al-Shafi'i's views, and his father said, son, anyone reaching the caliber of Imam al-Shafi'i will accuse him of what he is not. People started to get jealous of him, saying he's a sympathizer, he overpraises Ahlul Bayt and he's one of them, Rafidis, and others they said no, he's distant from them, and so on and so forth. He said, anyone who says that, then of course with a man like this in high caliber. The second accusation that they made against Imam Shafi'i was that he was a worshipper of reasoning and philosophy. Again, only because he had studied under a great scholar who was an expert in ilm al-kalam, philosophy interpretation. Just because he studied under him does not make him like that. But he has nothing to do with either philosophy or Shia at all. Abu Hanifa considered that, different views to Imam al-Shafi'i. He considered that Bani Umayyah and Bani Abbas were illegitimate khalifas. Imam Malik agreed but differed about some other aspects. Imam al-Shafi'i said the Khalifa, it is not a must for the Khalifa to be from the Prophet's family. Because the Prophet ﷺ said, هذا الأمر يضعه الله حيث يشاء. People said, Ya Rasulullah, if you die, who becomes the Khalifa? From your family? And he replied by saying, this matter, the Khilafah, Allah places whomever He finds, He wills to be in this place. So He didn't say it has to be from my bloodline. And the Quran states that royal blood comes through the boys. But Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had no boys. So then again, he used this as evidence. But he said anyone from Quraysh should be from the Ahlul Bayt, but don't make it a political issue. He had a weird opinion, or a strange opinion, about a person who overcomes power, who overcomes the government, and the people pledge for them, and they make the ummah better and acceptable. He agreed that they can revolt. But Allahu A'lam about that. This is his view. As I said before, the students of Imam Malik became extreme in their following of Imam Malik. And after he died, Imam Shafi'i found that people were saying, قال رسول الله, and the others would say, قال الإمام Malik. Imam Malik says. But Rasulullah he'll say, but Imam Malik said, and he knows about the Prophet more than you. Even though something was clear. So Imam Shafi'i wanted to draw a line. Came up with the book, and he wrote evidence against some of the errors of his teachers. Because of this, and because of all these different accusations, and because Imam Shafi'i became the top in the world in his time, Imam Malik's students, and this is a problem, they hated him a lot, and they waited for him when he was delivering a dars in the masjid in Yemen. They entered upon him, and after he finished his lesson, they attacked him, and they beat him until he became unconscious. He died a few days later. Now the scholars say he didn't die directly from the wounds. So they don't say he was murdered by his students, but he had another disease, another illness. that when he got beaten up, it exacerbated, it made it worse, and then he died. He stayed in his own, he died there. But as a result of that beating up by the students of his great Imam and great master. We call this, there's a word called paradox. Have you ever heard of that word? Paradox. If you fill the cup too much and it spills over, no one likes that. If you have food and you add too much salt in it, it tastes nice with salt. But if you put a kilo of salt in it, the food is ruined. If you put no salt at all, you can't taste it. Like in tea, for example. So anything that goes to extremes becomes, وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ, corrupt and destruction. And here Imam Shaafi, half of his reason for death was that he was beaten up by the students of Imam Malik. And if Imam Malik was alive, he would beat his own students up for doing that. Now, similarly, like Imam Ahmad, who was tortured for 15 years as well, and Imam al-Tabari, who was actually attacked by the students of Imam Ahmad, again for the same reason, zealous approach. So the problem was not, Imam al-Tabari was attacked by the students of Imam Ahmad in the same way the students of Imam Malik attacked Imam Shaafi, to the point where Tabari also became so injured, and he was an old man. He went into his house and he was sick, and he couldn't get out of his house for the next few months until he died from his sickness. And his family couldn't even do a funeral for him because they're afraid the people were going to attack them. So guess what? He was buried in the backyard of his house. Imam al-Tabari. Because of the zealous extremism of these so-called students, sadly, who overpraised their Imams to the point where they made them almost like prophets. How dare you differ on my Imam's opinion? And sadly we have this today. I will divide from my brother and my sister because we differ on a small minute issue. Let alone our personal issues, something about the deen. We differ upon little things when we know the Imams. And we're not even Imams ourselves. When the Imams themselves respected each other and revered each other's views. We heard that Imam Malik had the opportunity with the Khalifa to burn all the books and make his book Al-Muwatta be the standard for all of the world. But he said, no, don't. Don't, ya Khalifa, ya Amir al-Mu'mineen. For there are others who have more knowledge maybe, and hadith that may have not reached me. They all said, we are only human beings. We say something today and tomorrow we may change it. So إذا صح الحديث فهو مذهبي. If the hadith is correct, then it's my madhab. Imam Shaafi has many quotes, and Imam Malik and Ahmad, all of them have many quotes about don't follow my madhab. Don't be blind following to my madhab. We are only human beings. We change. If you research and investigate, our knowledge is not the end. This is what they used to say. The spirit of Islam, which talks about equality, why all these rules about this and that and that and that? And some scholars even went to the extent, when you get married, they put all these conditions of marriage. She has to be of this and he has to be of that and that, and it complicates it. And the scholars say, the Sahabas at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, they used to make the halal easy. So, as a result, the haram became hard. Today, we make the halal hard, so the haram becomes easy. They were simple people. And we make things difficult and complicated for no reason. I don't know why. So my dear brothers and sisters, this is Imam Shaafi'i, died at the age of about 54 years of age in Yemen. And he was one of the great scholars of Islam. Today he's probably the second or third largest school of thought followed in the world, especially in places like Hijaz, as I said before, Ash-Sham, and Baghdad, among other places. From here, I would like to take about a 5-minute break, because I want to start with the next Imam, his student, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. And inshallah, we hope to cover about 20 minutes of Imam Ahmad. And next week, inshallah, we will continue the last lesson for our series. Before I end this portion of my lecture, brother was telling me that next week there is a guest from Saudi Arabia, and a sheikh who's coming down. And I think he has a lesson in Preston Masjid on Friday. And that coincides with ours. Now, I don't know what time it's going to start there. Is it at 7? Anyone can tell me? 8 o'clock. So we start at 7, inshallah. I don't want to break it. Whoever would still like to come at 7 over here and afterwards go to Preston Masjid, that's fine. And I think he'll be here on Sunday as well. With all due respects to the Imam who's coming, and I revere them a lot, please do attend to gain greater knowledge. Like Imam Shaafi, who travelled through lots of parts of the world and got his knowledge from different teachers, you can do so as well. And I am nowhere near someone like that. But I would like to finish this series inshallah next week, because we have an appointment, and the mu'min should stick and finish what they started. So this is my view and my way. I like to finish what I started, even if there were 5 or 6 people here. هذا وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.
اللهم صل على محمد رسول الله. اللهم صل على محمد نبي الله. اللهم صل على محمد رسول الله. اللهم صل على محمد.
نعم حبيبي.